tell me about this. If we don't encounter the numinous in the outer world and in the inner world.
Yeah, so he's talking about, this is again from the James Hollis book on Jungian depth psychology, and he's talking about, by numinous, he means the phenomena that we can't quite understand, things that are so meaningful that they're almost transcendent, they're sublime, they are awe-evoking experiences. And these parts, it's kind of like Alan Watts' idea of like this unspeakable world, these parts of life that are so deep in beauty and a bit of mystery and spark our interest and our curiosity on such a deep level that they're difficult to like put into words. They're quite ineffable, and and that's what makes them sort of numinous. Is they're so, you can't really pin it down. It's just like the concept of infinity, or the concept of beauty, or the concept of love. You can't pin these things down to what they really are. You just sort of know them on an experiential feeling basis, right? And I think religious ideas of God and the Holy Spirit are numinous. The concepts that point to the numinous, right? The infinitude, if that's a word, or the infinite, or the complexity of the universe and experience. That's what he's pointing to here. And he said, if people don't have a relationship to the numinous, right, in some manner, if we don't have some way of trying to comprehend the parts of life that are most meaningful, then that desire to connect with that metaphysical, like, complex thing will manifest in unhealthy ways. And he puts it in this quote that I've put on our shared notes document, is about how that desire for connection to something bigger than ourselves manifests in things like hedonism and like the impulsive materialism that we live in today, or all the addictions, whether that's a substance or a pathological behavior like gambling, or whether it's a sex addiction or an addiction to self-flagellating comments and low self-esteem and attention in the social world, and all these kind of ways that we look in the outer world for connection is a consequence of us not finding that relationship with the divine. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean in a traditional religious sense. You don't have to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Sikh or a Buddhist or whatever to have that. That just means a connection to something bigger than you, I guess. And I just think this quote sums it up quite beautifully. I mean, I guess I should read it to the people, as they don't have access to this document that me and Jacob are looking at right now. And the quote goes, "If we don't encounter the numinous in the outer world and in the inner world, it will manifest itself as somatic illness for us, or some kind of pathology. Or will be owned by it in our search for it among the objects upon which we projected our existential yearning in the outer world. New shiny objects, seductive electronic technologies, sex and romance, hedonism, self-absorption, and most of all distraction by a noisy culture constitute the chief spirituality of our time." I think the point, I'll just finish with this, that I like so much is, we search for it among the objects upon which we projected our existential yearning in the outer world. So let's say that you've got this internal like desire to connect with something meaningful, to have the answers to questions like, who am I? What's my life about? What should I be doing? If you don't have those answers, if that yearning isn't addressed, right, it will manifest in the things that you find gripping in the outer world. You try to fill that hole. You try to fill that desire, those questions of who am I and what matters most. You'll be caught by the narratives of the world that are trying to sort of sway you down a particular path. But actually that isn't a good strategy. That will never actually fill that hole you're ultimately trying to fill. So I don't feel like I've explained that amazingly. So I think if you've got questions or points of your own, that will help us to kind of pick this apart and make more sense and make it more sort of practical, I guess.
Yeah. I think things like love, God, and wisdom, these higher forces, they're all internal and in a way, and if we're not worshipping that, then we're going to be worshipping something external. Like, I think a good way to think about this is, you mentioned something like gambling, and that if you wake up in the morning and all you can think about is gambling is your god, and because it's a higher power that's bigger than you. And so I think about this with Nietzsche's will to power, and you kind of pointed this very well with James Hollis, but Nietzsche also says basically the same thing about if your will to power isn't in becoming a better man, in becoming a more powerful, self-actualized Übermensch, then it's going to go towards hedonism, or it's going to go towards will to power over yourself, which are things like self-harm, because we all have this will to power. So I agree with James Hollis, and I think it's a good question, isn't it? Especially people that aren't really religious. Like, what is your God? What is that thing that you worship? That feeling, or that you're trying to hit every day.
Well, I just have one thing on that to sort of put it in context, which you've done really well with the gambling idea that maybe people can wrap their heads around. But okay, let's say you have a gambling addiction and you know it's not right, and it's not a behavior you want to continue because it's tearing your life apart. It's torn your financial life apart. It's torn maybe your relationship or your family relationships because you've asked them for money that you can't pay back just so you can continue gambling on whatever. But something keeps pulling you back there, and that may be because of it fills some sort of emotional hole in you. It stops the intrusive thoughts and the horrible, like, suicidal, depressing feelings from entering your psyche, and something just brings you back there that feels like it's out of your control. It's almost like, and I guess anyone listening to this, including me and you, Jacob, can relate to this in a way, but when we have a vice or some kind of behavior pattern or habit that we don't like doing, it's almost like something that isn't us possesses us to do that thing, right? You're like possessed by the spirit of a gambling or whatever your addiction is. It could be food or whatever, or like, junk food or whatever, right? It doesn't feel like it's us. And that's why that idea you shared, I think, on the podcast about Nietzsche saying that every drive has its own philosophy. Well, that's me paraphrasing there, but also every drive attempts to philosophize in its own whatever, something along those lines. But basically, a drive like that has its own sort of narrative for the world and its own thoughts and its own feelings, and it possesses you to do the thing, right? Religion talks about, well, I'm talking about Christianity, I guess, talks about the Holy Spirit, right? As a divine energy, a divine spirit that possesses you when you're in line with what God wants or God's will, or when you're living like Christ, or you're following that kind of good Christian path. To me, that's similar ideas. It's which spirit are you being possessed by, or, as you said so nicely, what is your God? What is the divine spirit that possesses your behavior and your beliefs?
There was this really cool quote I saw from, I can't remember what philosopher Riyad posted on his story, and so this quote goes: "It is our belief that if the soul were visible to the eye, every member of the human species would be seen to correspond to some species of the animal world, and a truth scarcely perceived by thinkers would be readily confirmed, namely that from the oyster of the eagle, from the swine to the tiger, all animals are to be found in men, and each of them exists in some man. Sometimes several animals are nothing but the portrayal of our virtues and our vices made manifest to our eyes, the visible reflections of the soul. God displays them to us to give us food for thought." And how I kind of interpret that is, if the soul is this kind of book that you read, Ernest Becker's Denial of Death, it's sort of similar ideas about that, and how if every member of the human species was some animal, well, what part of our psyche, I think, is very animalistic, and in its own unique way, like it's kind of an archetype. And
that's the id from Freud's perspective. In his tripartite model of personality, there was this pleasure principle, this component of the psyche that was the driver of primal instinct, like for food and for sex and for power and for status.
Yeah, and I'm guessing with his his superego, that's going to be more like the divine self, right?
Well, it was the superego was more like the morals, like the internalization of moral values from your parents and your culture, and that forms your conscience. And then you've got your ego that sits in the middle of these two forces. It's kind of like the context that it was put in when I was learning about it was like the id will tell you to steal the pair of jeans from the clothing shop because you'll get a hit of dopamine from the new material object and the thrill of shoplifting, and you won't have to pay for it, so that's great. But then your superego goes, well, that's against society's rules, we shouldn't steal, and also your parent, what would your mum and dad say if you told them that you stole a pair of jeans? And then your ego is the conscious you, the thing that you refer to when you say I, that sits in the middle of these two, that feels the anxiety of that conflict.
My train of thought here is, if you're not worshipping your higher self, your symbol part of you, then you're going to be worshipping your animal. And as this sort of quote continues, you see people that kind of feed this lower self, always sort of craving desire, and I think of that in the animal archetype of like a vulture. But you can, I guess, I took this quote and I interpreted it on like plants as well, and how you might get this like con artist that scams people. He's a bit like a Venus flytrap, and which, that's to say, like, the animals are nothing but the betrayal of virtues and vices. Like, that's like, you can also be like a good animal though. So like, you could be like a lion, and you're this like apex predator, and or you can have like a really like strong tree, and that's why when Peterson's I can't remember what he says about this, but he does this like lecture on the Lion King, and he's like, well, why is a lion a king? And he sort of goes down all of it and dissects it. There's something in this, I think.
And one thing that Hollis talks a lot about in the book is, he says, what spirit do you want to guide you in your life? Now, for the people that are more skeptical about using the word spirit, I can say it in another way, like, what drives do you want to invest in? I think that's a better way of thinking about it. Because if you're not sort of spiritually minded, the idea of a drive we all kind of understand and acknowledge. The drive to eat, the drive to sleep, the drive to get good at stuff. We all have those, right? But there are more complicated drives, like the drive to stay in your room and be in that perpetual state of fear from the world, and that state of anxiety, and that state of diminishment, I guess, diminishing and violating your potential in life, just sitting and waiting for life to happen. Or there's the drive to go out and explore and adventure, and that doesn't necessarily mean being super extroverted socially. I just mean go to the local woods and go and walk around and feel the energy of nature, or go and paint a painting, or go and write a piece of music, or whatever. That it's like the drive to approach life and the drive to avoid it. These are real things, and Hollis says we can listen to them if we're present enough, and we can decide which one we want to possess us. And he says then a good question to ask yourself is, when it comes to any decision, is, will this decision expand me or diminish me? Will it lead to a larger life or a smaller life? And I think we're talking about the same thing here. If you invest in your animal or your id from a Freudian perspective, those animalistic primal drives within you, if you just invest in those, then you end up just overvaluing impulsive pleasure and hedonism in the moment. And that doesn't lead to a large life. That leads to a smaller life, and that diminishes you, because you'll feel more anxious, and you'll be lower in self-esteem, and your life won't feel meaningful, and you'll just want to sort of fold yourself up and put yourself in the bin. Whereas you can make better decisions and serve the part of you that's empathetic, the part of you that loves people unconditionally, the part of you that wants to work hard for the right reasons, and that leads to a larger life, and that expands you. And that's a real thing, and that's what real courage is to listen to that voice over the easier momentary pleasure voice. And that's I think that's what we're talking about.
A uni friend came to me the other day and said, what do you think about football betting? I've started like sort of playing around with it, and I've seen people win like a couple, like £5 or £10 or whatever. And in the context of the conversation, I don't think that leads to a larger life. Even if you win, you haven't really achieved anything. You haven't become a better person because of it. It's kind of just a luck thing. And I mean, personally with the gambling, it's something that I've been very drilled into from my parents, that this is a waste of time. Gambling is a losing game, and I'm kind of fortunate because of that. But yeah, have you ever known any like gamblers or anyone like that? Like I can't imagine it's a nice life at all.
No, well, I've had distant family members that it's been sort of part of their decline, but then there were other things involved, like alcohol and things like that perpetuate the cycle. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because what does gambling do? It's like a siren, right? Or it's like we talked about the metaphor of the woman in the red dress a lot. It's like this hope dances in front of you hope of an escape from your current situation. If you win big financially, then you won't have to live this life and work this job or be in this situation or live in this place, and you can be a different person. You can have another life. You can escape who you are now, and that idea dances in front of you, and it's beautiful, and it captures your attention. And just like, the siren story from mythology, you sail towards the rocks, and you realize maybe when you lose, or when you've lost all your money or cut all your relationships off, or your life gets worse through this process, that actually you were being led into a fantasy that wasn't real, and it kills you. And it's that's why those mythologies are so powerful, obviously, because they're about us and they're about our lives. And I think that's what's going on. It's clear to me that's what's going on. It's another one of those things in life that masquerades as the thing we ultimately want, like an escape from our current reality and a thrill, but actually when it comes to the outcome, it's not what it presented itself as.
Yeah, it's a quick fix. I think the final thing I'll say about this idea is what you have as your gods can also be like a person, like some sort of role model that you admire, and then I think it's also is that healthy? Well, I suppose it depends on the person that you are, but that you are admiring. But I think that you should be careful who you point as a god, because it could be a lot of these social media people and these perfect people. And that's why they say never meet your heroes, because they might not actually be as perfect as they are when you meet them.
Well, that's it. One final thing on that. That's what, again, Hollis emphasizes in the book, is the answers are inside you, right? What should lead you to a larger life and expand you are not going to be found out there. It's inside. That's why when Jung said, "Those who look outside dream, and those who look inside awaken," which was a quote I talked about, God, maybe 90 podcast episodes ago now, is so powerful. And that's why, we talk about him too much, but that's because his ideas are so powerful and do associate with a lot of things we think about. That's why Peterson says, think of the best possible, realistic, conceivable future for you and in your life, and try and aim for that and make tiny, small steps towards it. The world, and try not to listen to the world. Just write about what you want, what you really want, not what your parents want or what your culture wants or what you thought you want when you were 12. Like what you actually want, what actually means something to you. And that's the idea of the ideal self, the higher self, the future self, that vision, that image, which it can be our God. And that's why I draw that comparison between our future self and God that Instagram hated me for. But yeah, really nice, man. But let's move on. Tell me about Nietzsche and making him practical.
So the question that I've been trying to answer for the last one or 2 weeks is his quote about how to treat life like a work of art. How do we do that practically? And so I tried to figure this out, and a lot of this is I've combined a lot of Nietzsche's thoughts from the Gay Science, especially book 2, and then I've combined that with Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, A Way of Being, and then also my thoughts as well. So I don't know if I should keep saying, Rick Rubin said, I might just leave it and just like assume that a lot of this is heavily inspired for everyone listening. So to provide some context, like how should we kind of think about art? And so Nietzsche points out, without art, we lack the tools to really see and appreciate ourselves, because art dramatizes, it stylizes, it simplifies, and in doing so it kind of elevates the human experience. And poetry, you can think of this in terms of poetry in that it furthers this kind of plainness, this very small talk of communication, and rearranges, he uses the really nice metaphor of rearranging the particles in the sentence into something beautifully irrational. So it produces this, when you see some kind of art in your daily life and this artistic conversation, it produces this unconquerable desire to yield, to join in. You really want to join in, because it's all of a sudden the human experience has just got higher. So yeah, like this is what we experience in the podcast, and art has the ability to change us because it's something that can cut so deeply, and it hits us in an indirect way and we resonate so deeply because it hits our emotions and it moves us. And music, like it just bypasses the brain and goes straight into the heart. But art is also an illusion, so it is literally painting things more beautiful, better than they are. Whereas something like logic would just say, this is how it is. And so if you're the guy that he's got the money, he's got the mortgage, and he's in shape, but he's not playful and he doesn't have stories and doesn't take risks, would you want to be that guy, or would you want to be this Thomas O'Malley, this the male dog from The Lady and the Tramp, who has this more artistic life? I'm going to talk about the dog a bit more, but I realise he's kind of the archetype of the fool, and because he's not all heavy and serious, and he doesn't have this weight on him. He's very light. So, with that context, by the way, you can chip in at any time because this is quite a long point. But the first part of the solution for me is you first need to achieve the awareness to live your life like it's a work of art. So, a little story that's happened recently, and this is the example of something that I guess I've done that has led to this kind of life philosophy. And so I was in the gym with my friend Alban, and we noticed little sort of details about this gym and how there's this kind of chalk community that comes in and they sort of vandalize the wall with their like handprints, and then when you go like to the cable machine, there's just like this messy like chalk everywhere. And then you've also got this one bald guy who's like, he's stacking up like a pyramid of weights, and he's like stopping anyone else from using these like 3 different sets of like dumbbells. And then someone comes over and he's like, can I use it? And he's like quite rude to him, and he's like, no. So we take that, and we then somehow got ourselves in this conversation with the staff about how like we need the authority to prevent antisocial behaviour in this gym and prevent the short community. We say it in like a very sort of jokey way, but then that like goes on to like going in like a proper like conversation with the gym lady, and now we end up currently I'm doing market research for her and asking what the people in this gym would like to improve what sort of factors would improve the people in the gym's customer satisfaction. And so what's happened there is I've noticed a very small thing. I've been inspired, and then I've come in as this artist that brings this idea to life, because now I'm trying to find solutions to this, and I then I'm trying to create something, and the lady in the gym kind of becomes this audience that's going to receive my solutions. And to break this example down, so you kind of need to expand your awareness to even perceive what like art is trying to communicate, and to be able to do that is to focus on things that are bigger than yourself. So a part of this as well is to get rid of your ego, because as it's written in the gay science, egoism is the perspective law in our sentiment, according to which the near appears large and momentous, while in the distance the magnitude and importance of all things in life diminish. So you're just focused on the things that's near you, whereas there's stuff in the distance where that's not even that important, which kind of ties back to what we were saying before. And so Van Gogh, he wasn't trying to paint this thing of himself just to kind of express how handsome and how valuable he is, but in a sense, but he was thinking about, well, how do I portray the night sky as purely as beautiful as it possibly is, to do it justice. And that's what it means by separating the art from the artist. And so Nietzsche goes on to say, with a very loud voice, a person is almost incapable of reflecting on subtle matters, which again I interpret as this: you've got this loud inner egoistic self that kind of distracts you from this depth and introspection of these small details. And if I quote Rick Rubin here, within the richness of nature, the variations are easily noticeable. Some are shouts, others are whispers. Even an element seems static, whether a work of art in a museum or everyday object in the kitchen. When we look deeply into it, we see the newness. We recognise aspects unnoticed before. And to notice is to be aware and to listen. this is why the ears are the only senses that don't have lids or turn-offs. So I think Rick kind of illustrates that even something small in our kitchen can be, an object in our kitchen can be art if we took the time to notice and to see the beauty. And sort of everyday things are beautiful. So yeah, that's one part of this, my answer. Did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I made a couple of notes as you were talking, because I think that's the best way for me to stay engaged, and sort of come back to points that you've made that spark something in me. But I was thinking about, in that first bit you talked about Alan Watts' idea that life is a dance. That's the best way to think about it. If you want to live your life like a work of art, I guess dance is to me feels like the most appropriate metaphor, because you have to be in the moment. You have to align yourself with the music, right? And maybe we can think about music in this analogy like the spirits or drives we talked about in the first point. What motivates you? What drives your behavior and your actions? That's the music you're dancing along to. In a dance, you have to do with other people have to be there. I guess you can dance alone, but it's always more engaging to dance along with other people in a group or with a partner. And there's no sort of outcome, I guess. It's a manifestation of play. You know, you're not doing dance for any logical, rational outcome. You're doing it to be in the moment and to play along with the music. So that's one thing that sort of occurred to me. The other point is just the one you quickly made about the ego. And the thing that I've written here is the ego already thinks it knows everything it needs to know, right? Because what the ego wants is just to maintain the status quo. The ego likes its reality, even if it's a fantasy. The ego doesn't like uncertainty or change or ambiguity. It just likes things as it already thinks they are, right? And because it already thinks it knows everything it needs to know, and it thinks it understands its reality as much as it needs to, it presumes there is nothing to gain from things like art. And therefore, because it already believes that there's nothing to gain from art, it can't see what's there. And so you have to drop your own ego to really see what's going on in a piece of art. And like you say, that piece of art can be mundane things like the view outside your bedroom window, or the beautiful scene of a family out and about in public, or a bit of graffiti you see on a wall, or whatever it is, any small daily example you can think of. You have to drop your righteousness of your ego to see what's really going on there and appreciate the art. But yeah, I really like this line of thought. Carry on.
To live your life like it's a work of art, you have to be a fool. And there's this little passage where a sage asks a fool, what is the way to happiness? And the fool answers straight away by saying, like one who is always... he says, admire yourself and live on the streets. And then the sage says, well, you require too much. It suffices to admire oneself. Which the fool says, but how can one constantly admire without constantly despising? And I interpret this as this living on the street metaphor is without needing needing anything material. And so the male dog from the Lady and the Tramp, he's kind of has this. He's on the street, and but he also has the self-respect, which was said when he says to admire oneself. And so the sage says, well, I agree with the self-respect thing, but living on the street, I don't know. That implies that you kind of don't care about society, and you're very detached if society was to reject you. But the fool says, well, to admire yourself, you must see what is also not admirable. As the rest of the people go low, you go high. Which is why a lot of this sort of genius art in our time a lot of the genius art in our time wasn't recognised at the time. We only understand it once the rest of society has changed enough to see it, because talent is only recognised when the fool becomes the saviour. And this is why, Nietzsche only sold 300 copies in his lifetime. Kafka never published a book in his lifetime. And maybe that has a little bit of to do with the marketing of, being more value after the death. But as humans, we kind of dismiss these novel ideas at the time, and eventually come round to them. And well, then it means, well, it's okay to be a fool, and for people not to try and understand your art in the way of kind of living an experience. And I guess I kind of interpret this as, well, I think a lot of people in uni will, in hindsight, think of, did I spend uni in this courageous sort of fearless way of trying to start this thing on the side? Did I break up with this person earlier and start to do my own thing and sort of adventure? And maybe some of them say no, and this is kind of this energy that we only recognise that we weren't really painting the picture in the right way afterwards. And so a lot of these people that are living artistically are seen as a fool. And another part to this is to live. So treat your life like a work of art. You want to communicate pain, and so there's a passage where Nietzsche says, the first musician for me would be he who knew only the sorrow of the most profoundest happiness and no other sorrow. There is not hitherto been such a musician. The communication of pain is so very strong. So why? Well, why is pain so such a meaningful thing to say to someone and to express? Well, yeah, it triggers some stronger kind of emotions, but
it's universal as well. Everyone is pain, no matter where you're at, in society, or how comfortable your life is, or where you live in the world, you're going to experience some form of pain.
Nietzsche says, when it rains, poor men crowd with their problems, whereas the rich conceal their problems. As humans, we have in common is pain, so that's how we connect, and that's why when they give you sort of social media training, they say, well, you've got to be vulnerable, and that's how you get people to trust you. And that's why friendships, I think, in the Royal Marines and the Army are so valuable, and because they're so strong, because, well, they're doing a joint painful experience together, and that's what in video games I think we try and replicate. So this would suggest that we should kind of go through at least difficulty as humans, and then try and communicate that and express it. And in this rich man poor man analogy, there's a difference between the poor people who kind of huddle together and be like, oh no, I've got this thing that I can't do, and kind of moaning at each other's problems and problems of the world. But this kind of rich man, or this artist in this context, is able to kind of, I don't think, although it says conceal it, I mean kind of more express it, and in that form, because in that way you're kind of overcoming it by expressing it. And this is why Rubin says why so many artists overdose is because they're using drugs to numb a very painful existence, because artists are higher in openness, so they're more sensitive to see either tremendous beauty or tremendous pain, where others maybe don't, and they're confronted with these big feelings all the time, and a lot of them are in isolation, so that's why they might go to overdose. I wanted to finish with a couple really nice quotes that about art that I've tried to make bigger into life. So if you've written a book that's 300 pages long, try to reduce it to less than 100 without losing its essence. Making the simple complicated is commonplace. Making the complicated simple is where creative perfection is finally obtained. Perfection is not when there is no longer anything to add, or when there's no longer anything to take away. So as kind of interpreting that as in your life, well, there's always going to be things to add when you look at your life and this life painting. You always wanted to do this experience at this age, and you never got to experience this. But the good life is when there's no longer anything to take away. I think that's a really nice way of seeing it. And lastly, the artist's process involves breaking rules, but there's also a place for imposing rules, because with rules create opportunities, and within the strict constraints, the problem solving becomes more specific, and it provides original and groundbreaking solutions. Georges Perec wrote an entire book without using the most common letter in the French alphabet, E. It went on to become the most celebrated experimental works of modern literature. The painter Yves Klein decided to limit his palette to one colour. This led him to discover a shade of blue no one had ever seen before. The shade itself was seen by many as effectively becoming the art, and was later named the International Klein Blue. With that, we spoke a little bit before about how you actually want limitations in the game of life. You actually want things to hold you back, to be holding you back. But that's where that's where a lot of the creativity comes from. And yeah, that's where I finish.
Oh, there's so much to unpack, which is good. It's really good. It's really good. I want to maybe make a note on this on a document so I come back to it. I want to make a point about the Fool archetype and then make a point about limitation. So I've written here, while you were talking earlier, life opens up beautifully when you don't need it to be any particular way. And I put need in italics. And I want to sort of focus for a moment on what we really mean by the fool in a positive sense. Because we're not talking about, the loser that sort of sits in bed on his Nintendo DS all day eating Doritos. Like, he's a fool in a whole different way. The fool we're talking about is, maybe a good definition. Let's play with this definition. Let's play with the definition that the fool is somebody who lives their life with very little to no ego consciousness, right? Because the ego doesn't want you to be a fool. Because the ego has this idea of who you are that it doesn't want to shake. It doesn't want to be embarrassed. It doesn't want to be interrogated too deeply. It doesn't want to be found out as a fraud. The ego just wants everyone to leave it alone and let it continue living out its fantasy, right? The fool fucks all of that off and goes, well, I'm going to try something. I'm going to dance out in public. I'm going to make a joke and it might flop, right? I'm going to paint something even if some people think it's shit. I'm going to live my life with this philosophy that having joy in the moment and creating great things for other people and building a great life is what it's about, not what other people think of me, right? That's kind of I think that's kind of what we mean. And that's the kind of characteristics that, the tramp from Lady and the Tramp has, is that he doesn't really care that he's a street dog. He doesn't care. He doesn't care that he's got no collar and he doesn't have a family. In fact, he makes every family his family. He has a family that he goes to, a different family every night of the week, to have their dinner in his own way. He sort of takes these fragments of different parts of life. He doesn't just stick to one thing. He's playful with his life because he doesn't need it to be any particular way. The ego needs things to stay the same. The fool doesn't, right? And I think about this in my own life, and I think people can maybe take something away from this, of just how profoundly transformational that can be as a philosophy, right? So I'll put it in two contexts. One basketball, one the podcast, right? In basketball, if you need the game to go how you want it to go, you can't play properly because you're thinking too much about making everything fit into this cookie cutter mold of how you want each play, each quarter, each half, and then the game in its totality to go. You have to respond to it in the moment. You have to be willing to turn the ball over. You have to be willing to miss. You have to be willing to try that pass that may go off court. You have to be willing to be a fool, right? You have to be willing to miss in order to score. If I didn't shoot because I was afraid of missing and being a fool, I'd never score anyway. If you go out and play with fear, you can't play good basketball. And that's why you have to kind of have a level of letting it go, I guess. when it comes to the big moments. And that's something, for the context people listening, I'm about to go fly to my biggest tournament of my career so far in 2 weeks. And that's a philosophy I'm going to try and instill when I'm playing. Because if I need the game to go well, it's going to become a source of anxiety. If I don't need it to go any particular way and see it like an adventure in the definition that Peterson uses, where you don't know what's going to happen and you just go in with faith and hope, then it can only lead to the right outcome. And then with the podcast, right? If we did this because we needed it to go well, we needed people to like it, we needed it to be an instant source of status for us, then we kill the beauty of it, right? Instead, we're willing to be a fool. We're willing to mess up and talk about things that people find stupid. And you can put on Instagram that you don't think Africa exists, and I can tell weird stories about me on the side of the road when I had a flat tire looking at the stars and all this kind of shit. The world's laughing at us in many ways, but we're okay with that because we're on this journey of personal development and trying to understand the world in a more refined way and enhance our abilities to talk about interesting ideas and share them with the people that care about it. And so we've had to drop our egos. Like, if there's no way, Jacob, if you had an ego that was so like, if you were totally ego possessed, you couldn't do what you do every day in terms of like the comments that you're exposed to. You have to let that go a little bit and be willing to dance with that experience. And so this fool being a precursor to the savior is such a deep and brilliant idea. The more I think about it, the more I learn about it, because it's so true. You can't be anything if you're afraid to look silly. I mean, it's just like that. Who was that quote you said to me that was like, the intelligent man doesn't become anything, only the fool does? Like, was that Nietzsche again, or was it somebody else? Let me quickly Google it.
Yeah, I'd guess it was probably Nisha.
It was Dostoevsky.
Okay.
Makes sense. But yeah, it's so true. If you're so stuck in your intellect and your own academic ego, you can't be willing to grow and to change and to learn. And that's how you be a savior and a hero and live a beautiful life. So yeah, any thoughts on that before I go to the limitation point?
Yeah, I think a lot of especially in the podcast context, is us saying that we're right or thinking that we're right.
Yeah.
There's people that know a lot more than us on topics. There's a lot of comments that are like, "Oh, Joel, you just butchered that from Sapiens," because they've just read it or something, and you haven't read it for like 2 years. Or and yeah, on the Lady and the Tramp point, yeah, the tramp, he doesn't have expectation and he doesn't have an ego, and I think when you said that he doesn't have a collar, that's kind of my sort of interpretation, is he's detached from society. So, and what I guess I mean from that is that he's living in his own way, not to anyone else's expectation. Yeah.
And this point of limitation is smaller than the one I just made, but it's... So you made this great point about how a lot of creativity requires limitation. So true, right? If somebody put a piece of paper in front of you and told you to draw something, that's difficult, right? That's really difficult. Anything? Like what? Draw anything? I don't know where even to start. How do I even begin? Whereas if you sit down and tell somebody to draw a landscape of the seaside, it's so much easier then to create something beautiful, but it's within the confines of a context and of a brief, right? Or like you said, that guy that created a painting with just one color. It's like within the limitations, he was able to create more beauty than if he just splattered every single color under the sun onto a canvas. It's like more isn't better. Okay. And then you nicely applied that to life, which I really do agree with. More isn't always better. I think what we want in life is depth, not breadth, right? And that beauty, that meaning that we're all looking for, isn't through chasing more and more and more and more, as much as the narratives in the material world might want you to think that. Buy this iPhone fucking 47, Amazon Prime this new like sandwich to your front door, like all of this like more bullshit, like, quicker, get this Uber to this place and go and see this, go and see this new TV show that everyone's raving about. It's just, there's a new thing all the time. Stimulation, information, more. And it just fills your brain up with shit. Right? And that's, Chuck Palahniuk's quote about Big Brother not watching you, but instead dancing in front of you and like not using physical force to prevent your creativity, but really filling you with so much more that you don't think clearly and you don't live your life with this sense of peace and contentment is so true. Instead, think of your life like that guy painting with one color, right? You don't want to be splashing 4,000 different colors onto this canvas. It's going to be a disorganized, chaotic mess. Why not focus on the things that you already have and improve them, right? Rather than looking at how you can look outside of yourself for that next thing to thrill you, how can you make your romantic relationship or your friendships, pick like 2-3 of your friendships and make them the best they can possibly be? Like, limit yourself to get good at one thing, like a career or like some kind of skill that you want to master. Work on one kind of self-development practice, be that reading or meditating or journaling or playing an instrument or whatever, and like focus on a small handful of your social relationships. If you get those 3 things, like painting with just those few colors, you can create this beautiful life for yourself. And that doesn't require loads of money. It doesn't require loads of investment of meaningless time and energy on shit that doesn't fucking matter anyway. That creates the beautiful image. That is depth and not breadth of experience, which is ultimately what we want anyway. So if for people listening, I guess a good takeaway point that I'm going to sort of instill into my brain and is useful for you and everyone else is there is so much potential for meaning in your life that is just sat in front of you, whether that's your partner, your relationship with your parents, your best friend, or it's the project that you started 2 years ago that you didn't finish, or the kind of person you could be at your work or your school or your form of education. You're leaving so much on the table already. And if you think that keeping up with what the news says or the next Instagram reel or buying the new fucking Gymshark hoodie is gonna make you feel better about your life, it won't. Maybe for 10 minutes. But if you limit yourself to the few colors that you already have on your palette, you can create a more beautiful, deeper picture than just splattering any old thing on that canvas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like what you said about how you can't do everything. You can't try and dance a waltz and foxtrot and Bollywood type of stuff.
That's so right. You can't do every dance at the same time because it's going to be so out of tune and you're just going to look silly. You have to pick something. Pick the dance and fucking do it with enthusiasm and intensity.
Yeah, you write a book without the letter E.
That would be tough. But yeah, man, that's really nice. Anything more to add before we maybe move on to one more topic for the day?
No, tell me about life can only be understood backwards.
So yeah, we'll have this as a last point for today, and then my third one we can save for another episode because we're probably going to be doing a lot of just me and you before I go away. But yes, there's this quote from Kirkegaard where he said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Right? And I've been thinking about that a lot over the past few days. And what I concluded was, and what I think he's trying to communicate to us, is that living our lives and understanding our lives are different processes. They can't happen at the same time. They're 2 distinct ways of being. They're 2 different directions, like he puts in the quote. And it also made me think of a writer called Alan Bennett's idea of his self that lives and his self that writes, and how they talk to each other, but they're distinct. And one goes out and does the living and has the experiences, and the other reflects on them and writes about them and puts them into his screenplays and to his novels. As in, he's living forward in this self and he's understanding backwards with the next self, if that makes sense. I think that is the way it is. And then I also then thought about how just doing one is dangerous in either case, right? If you just aim to live, then you will focus primarily on your desires and impulses in the moment, or you will just continue having experiences after experience after experience without processing and consolidating what's really going on and reflecting on what's right, what's wrong, what you'd like to do more of, what you'd like to do less of, what you think of this person, how your relationships are, whether this is the right career for you, etc., etc. But I think so many people live in that predicament. That's why things like midlife crises happen, because people have been living out this one narrative that they gathered when they were 15 years old, and now they're 45 and they realize that's not what they wanted, because they didn't take the time to understand their life and go backwards and reflect and be introspective. But equally, you can't just understand your life. That's the image of the philosopher that lives in a hut in the woods and just laments on his existence without actually going out and doing anything. That in itself is a violation of the meaning of life. Yes, it's a sort of idyllic image for some people, I guess, the solitary monk or whatever. But he's not had the experience of an intimate relationship or of having a family or of pursuing something meaningful in a career. They're not living. You're just seeking to understand what the feeling of your hut in the woods. You want a fine balance between living and understanding. You want to go out into the world and have your adventures, be spontaneous, do things that maybe that were motivated by an irrational decision. Say sometimes you want to make mistakes, you want to fuck up, you want to mess around, you want to be silly, but equally, you also want to take time to reflect and go, well, what did I learn from this instance? What can I do to improve in the future? What can I do that increases the probability that the outcome will be positive or more positive later down the line? And it's like this. It's like Alan Bennett's two selves, of one that does the living and one that does the writing, or in our case, it's one that lives forwards and one that understands backwards. And that's why, and I'll conclude with this final bit, that's why journaling for me is such a foundational practice in the quality of my life, because for like nearly 2,000 days now, I have a brief record of how I think about my life. And I know that so many big decisions, like, do I move to this part of the country? Do I go to this university? Do I play for this basketball team? Do I pursue this hobby? Do I ask out this girl? Do I invest in this friendship? All those decisions have been like consolidated and processed through that practice. And it's helped me deal with my emotions if something uncomfortable and anxiety provoking happens. And so it's where I understand my life. But out there in the world, outside of my desk and outside of those pages, and maybe this podcast, you could agree, does, the same sort of level, same sort of understanding. Outside of that, in the world, is where I do my living. There's Joel Clifton, the character, Joel Clifton, the basketball player, and the student, and etc., etc. So tell me what you think about this kind of division between living and understanding.
It reminds me of this little bit by Alan Watts, especially the understanding bit where he says, why doesn't everyone just fly away and be a monk and go against this capitalist, greedy society? And he says, well, everyone, imagine everyone trying to get on this one flight at extra airways. It just wouldn't happen. And people need to come to this decision independently and in their own time, and understand, I guess in this context, after they lived, like that they have to live at their own pace to then understand at their own pace, or something like that. And it also reminds me of the guy that we used to know, Phil, who was he just kind of lived, I guess, or he was just kind of in this spiritual realm all the time, and maybe didn't have the appropriate drill sergeant. And that reminded me of you saying how we need both, because he lacked that, and you could see that in his life.
And even though he was spiritually deep, his material life was falling apart. You want to be the guy that can provide for his loved ones in the material world, but also in the spiritual world. That's why you need the drill sergeant and the Alan Watts. That's why you need to keep the soul and the world happy. Continue.
So it was living and writing, right? It was
Alan Bennett, this author. He said he had the self that lived and the self that wrote, but the Kirkegaard quote is living forwards and understanding backwards.
Do you think this is kind of like a cycle that we should do? Like kind of you go out, you live, and then you write and you reflect, and then you go again. Yeah, that's what I think we should do, because you don't want to go too long without reflecting, because then you don't learn and you don't pivot and you don't adjust yourself.
And I think that, to me anyway, it's my personal opinion that we both have gone on our own journeys investing in the fucking like young male self-development world and all that kind of shit. We'd done the cold shower shit, we'd done the meditation and the go to the gym and get jacked and all that kind of stuff, right? You know, I did all that stuff. I had that weird routine. I got up at 6 a.m, blah, blah, blah. The one like personal development practice that I actually still have in my busy life now outside of lockdown as a 20-year-old like student athlete and whatever is writing. It's more active than meditation, I guess, for me, and it feels like it actually moves the needle. Like a cold shower gives you a thrill, but I don't take them anymore, and I don't feel like my life is any worse. Whereas if I stopped journaling and if we open that up to stop writing, I'm a different human being.
Yeah, it's why they say, I guess, monk mode is maybe unhealthy, or there's maybe some criticism because, you know, as Law 18 states, don't build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. You want to be circulating yourself in the world and have something to reflect on. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
All right. Should we wrap this one up?
Yeah, man, I think that's a good place to call it. It's been good today.
Yeah, good points. That was good.
It's me, isn't it? Stop the recording.